4. Prepagent property ownership, who usually has responsibility for providing streets, utilities, sidewalks, and curbs in a new subdivision. What is the builder or developer? A developer's responsibilities are to make sure the streets, curbs, sidewalks, utilities, and gutters in a new subdivision are completed and functional. A real estate broker may have difficulty with personal property because its ownership rights and identification may be difficult to determine. This is because personal property can, what is be alienated, hypothecated and can become real property. Personal property, also known as chattel, is that category of property that is generally movable and can be hypothecated, alienated and become real property. A lease on real property that is for a defined period of time is considered to be. What is an estate for years? An estate for years is a lease on real property for a defined period of time. Any period of time. The word years is misleading. The expiration date of the lease is known when the lease is signed. An estate for years is not automatically renewed. A deed conveys ownership to the grantee as long as the existing building is not torn down. What type of estate does this deed create? What is determinable fee estate? A defeasible estate, also known as determinable, is created when a grantor transfers land conditionally. Upon the happening of the event or condition stated by the grantor, the transfer may be void or at least subject to annulment. What does the term short rate refer to? What is homeowners insurance? A higher periodic rate charged for a shorter term than that originally contracted. The increased premium charged by an insurance company on early cancellation of a policy to compensate the insurer for the fact that the original rate charged was calculated on the full period of the policy. This increased charge enters into a buyer's decision whether to assume the seller's existing homeowner's hazard insurance policy or to cancel it and obtain a new policy. Real property includes which of the following? What is appurtenances? Rights that belong to the land, and attached personal property. Real estate is property consisting of land and the buildings on it, along with its natural resources such as crops planted by the landowner, minerals or water, and appurtenances like sheds, swimming pools, and fences. In a real property transaction, physical items can be classified as either fixtures or personal property. Fixtures are those items which are physically attached to the house, while personal property includes all other types of property such as curtains, rugs, and portable appliances. Which of the following represents one of the essentials of a grant deed? What is parties capable of receiving the grant? There are several essentials to a valid deed, namely, 1. It must be in writing. 2. The parties must be properly described. 3. The parties must be competent to convey. 4. Be capable of receiving the grant. 5. The property conveyed must be adequately described. 6. There must be a granting clause, operative words or conveyance, I hereby grant. 7. The deed must be signed by the party or parties making the conveyance or grant. 8. Delivery and acceptance is required. Note, this is not the same as offer and acceptance. Meeting of the minds. Note, crops that have been harvested are no longer attached to the property. The word improvement would refer to all of the following except the foundation, trade fixtures, streets, a sanitary sewer system. What is trade fixtures? The term trade fixture refers to an item installed by a tenant in a rented commercial property that he or she removes at the end of the occupancy. More on this topic follows. What is the time frame in which a supplier must file a notice in the public record of a mechanic's lien for materials supplied? What is 90 days after the material is supplied? A lien may be filed by a mechanic within 90 days of the supply of materials. In the city of Los Altos, the local building code conflicts with the Uniform Building Code. Which code would take precedence? What is the one that imposes the higher standard? Building codes establish minimum standards in construction for the purpose of public safety. Local building codes for the most part set the highest standard of construction, but in the event of the application of minimum housing requirements and/or state and federal codes, the builder must adhere to the higher set standard. A charge imposed against real property to provide security for the performance of some type of act, usually to provide incentive for, or to satisfy a payment, is a. What is a lien? Liens are charges imposed against real property to provide security for the performance of some type of act, usually to provide incentive for, or satisfy a payment. In this example, a lien is the charge imposed against real property that provides security for the performance on a mortgage. Which of these is a lien on real estate? What is recorded mortgage? A mortgage lien is a form of conditional ownership of your property claimed by your home loan provider. Since your lender has a claim on your home, you need to keep up with your payment obligations or risk losing your property to foreclosure. A joint tenant can dispose of an interest held in real property by all of the following ways, except lease, gift, will, sale. What is will? Joint tenancy has the right of survivorship. If one joint tenant dies, the surviving joint tenants automatically absorb the decedent's interest. Because the surviving joint tenants get the deceased member's interest in the property, a joint tenant cannot will his, her interests. Which of these is a lien on real estate? What is recorded mortgage? A mortgage lien is a form of conditional ownership of your property claimed by your home loan provider. Since your lender has a claim on your home, you need to keep up with your payment obligations or risk losing your property to foreclosure. A tenancy in common requires which of the following? What is an arrangement for possession? Tenancy in common is a situation in which two or more people have ownership interests in a property. Each owner has the right to leave a share of the property to any beneficiary upon the owner's death. Tenancy in common requires all tenants to share the unity of possession, which means all tenants have a common right to use and possess the property. Jones conveyed his ranch to Brown using a land contract. The ranch was serviced by a mutual water company, and Jones was a stockholder in the company. The stock which Jones owned was appurtenant to the land. Does Brown have to enter into a separate contract for the stock of the mutual water company? What is no, because the stock was appurtenant to the land and therefore part of the real property and part of the land contract. Appurtenances are said to run with the land and they require no separate conveyance. Appurtenances include easements, stock in a mutual water company, covenants, and minerals. They are considered real property. Homeowner Ruth acquired the ownership of land that was deposited by a river running through her property by, what is accretion? Accretion means the addition to a parcel of land by sand or soil deposits due to the action of a river or other body of water over time. Avulsion refers to the loss of land as a result of its being washed away by sudden or unexpected action of nature, such as a flash flood that reroots a river. Which of the following statements concerning a life estate is false? All conveyances for a life estate have to be in writing to be enforceable. A person holding a life estate does not have fee title. A life estate can be a freehold estate. A life estate can never extend beyond the life of the life tenant. What is a life estate? Can never extend beyond the life of the life tenant. In common law and statutory law, a life estate is the ownership of land for the duration of a person's life. In legal terms, it is an estate in real property that ends at death when ownership of the property may revert to the original owner or is passed to a designated remainderman. With a life estate per autovai, however, the length of a life tenancy is based on someone else's life, so if the life tenant dies before the measuring life, the estate could extend beyond the life of the life tenant. Which of the following notices could be important to the filing of a mechanic's lien? What is notice of non-responsibility, notice of cessation and notice of completion? Notices for mechanic's liens are completion, cessation and non-responsibility to determine ownership. What is the court action taken? What is quiet title action? A court action intended to establish or settle the title to a particular property, especially where there is a cloud on the title. All parties with a possible claim or interest in the property must be joined in the action. A quiet title action is frequently used by an adverse possessor to substantiate the title, because having official record title makes it easier to market the property. Once the judgment or decree of the court has been recorded, proper record notice of the claimant's right and interest in the property is established. If four persons hold title to real property as tenants in common, they would be unable to determine which portion of the land is theirs. Tenants in common is when you share a specified proportion of ownership rights in real property, but not an exact area, and upon the death of a tenant in common, that share is transferred to the estate of the deceased tenant. Tenants in common do not have the right of survivorship. Sam and Nancy bought a store building and took title as joint tenants. Nancy died testate. Sam now owns the store. What is inseverability? Joint tenancy means that two parties have an undivided interest in a particular property and, upon the death of one party, full ownership automatically goes to the survivor. Therefore, dying testate having a will would not be relevant. Private restrictions on real property can be written either as a condition or a covenant. Which of the following is most correct concerning such restrictions? What is violation of a condition can result in penalties which are more severe, and can result in loss of title. When private restrictions take the form of conditions in written agreements, any breach of such conditions can result in more severe penalties than if they were in the form of a covenant. Often it results in a loss of title, such as in fee simple defeasible estate. Which of the following persons has the weakest position in a dispute against the owner of record regarding a recorded deed? What is a person with a prior unrecorded deed who is not in possession? Possession and recording function the same way, they both give constructive notice. Therefore, a person with unrecorded deed who is not in possession of the property and has no lien interest in the property would have the weakest claim against the recorded owner. Which of the following is a protection granted to lenders with multi-title insurance? Loss due to unrecorded mechanic's liens. Easements created during the term of the loan. All of the other options are correct. Loss due to unrecorded easements. What is all of the other options are correct? There are two basic kinds of title insurance, CLDA, California Land Title Association, and the more comprehensive ALTA, American Land Title Association. However, even though ALTA offers additional protections such as unrecorded mechanic's liens, individual policies often include a number of specific deletions. A charge imposed against real property to provide security for the performance of some type of act, usually to provide incentive for, or to satisfy a payment is a. What is a lien? Liens are charges imposed against real property to provide security for the performance of some type of act, usually to provide incentive for, or satisfy a payment. In this example, A lien is the charge imposed against real property that provides security for the performance on a mortgage. Under which of the following types of liens can both the personal property and the real property of the debtor be sold to pay the debt? What is a judgment lien? Most liens are against a specific property, such as a primary residence. Thus, a contractor seeking payment for a new debt cannot have a homeowner's car attached in settlement. A judgment lien, however, is a decision directed by the courts and can apply to whatever assets it deems appropriate. A negative declaration is, what is a positive response to an environmental impact statement? A negative declaration is a document that states upon completion of an initial study, that there is no substantial evidence that the project may have a significant effect on the environment. A negative declaration is a positive government response to an environmental impact statement, not a statement filed by a neighboring property owner. An owner who has a permanent right to cross over an adjoining owner's land has what is an easement. An easement is a right that the property owner has over a part of the property of another owner, usually the neighbor, for a certain purpose. An individual sold her house and moved into a cooperative apartment. Under the cooperative form of ownership, the individual will, what is become a shareholder in the corporation. Cooperative ownership is an apartment ownership similar to a condominium. In a cooperative ownership, the buyer receives shares of stock in the building corporation and a lease, or assignment of the seller's lease, of the apartment being sold. The seizure of property prior to a judgment is known as, what is an attachment? An attachment is a process by which a defendant's real or personal property is seized prior to a judgment being rendered in a lawsuit, although attachments can be issued after final judgment as well. A family rents a vacation home from July 5, 2005 to January 1, 2006. Their tenancy would properly be classified as, what is an estate for years? An estate for years can be for any fixed period of time, commencing on 03/8/1206 and terminating on 10/8/0106. It is personal property, and is also called chattel real. For example, if a tenant leased a warehouse for 6 months, that tenant would have an estate for years. If 3 different buyers take title to real property as joint tenants, there would be, what is one deed? With a joint tenancy ownership, only one title exists. Joint tenancy is a special form of ownership by 2 or more persons of the same property. The individuals, who are called joint tenants, share equal ownership of the property and have the equal, undivided right to keep or dispose of the property. Joint tenancy creates a right of survivorship. This right provides that if any one of the joint tenants dies, the remainder of the property is transferred to the survivors. What is the opposite of alienation? What is acquisition? Acquisition means just what you think, to acquire or receive something. The legal definition of alienation, however, is to transfer. Thus, alienation of affection in divorce proceedings doesn't mean a person has caused one spouse to dislike the other, though often a result, but rather to transfer his or her affection away from their partner to another party. Jenny owns 50 acres of land with 500 feet of frontage on a desirable recreational lake. She wishes to subdivide the parcel into saleable lots, but she wants to retain control over the lake frontage while allowing lot owners to have access to the lake. Which of the following types of access rights would provide the greatest protection for a prospective purchaser? What is an appurtenant easement? Appurtenant easements afford the most protection since they are generally a permanent feature of the property. Thus, in the case of sale, the lake access passes to any new owners. By contrast, an easement in gross is between 2 individuals, which would severely limit the attractiveness and value of the property if the original owner wished to sell. An easement on real estate would terminate if the holder of the dominant tenement recorded a, what is a quitclaim deed? The easement can be terminated by the dominant tenement if they record a quitclaim deed. The dominant tenement benefits from the easement. The servient tenement is burdened by it. Just think of what the word dominant means. It means they are in control. Thus they have the right to end the easement. Which of the following is not a characteristic of a fee simple title? It is transferable by will or intestate. It is always free of encumbrances. It is indefinite duration. It is transferable with or without consideration. What is it is always free of encumbrances? Fee simple title is not free of encumbrances. Which of the following is not an example of police power? What is declaration of restrictions? Be careful of the word not in the question. Declaration of restrictions is a statement made by a developer of a new subdivision which sets out the restrictions of general application throughout the new development. Police power is the power and authority of the government to enforce the laws of the government to protect the health, safety, morals and the general welfare of the public. Examples of police power would include zoning and rent control. When owners of real property hold title as tenants in common, what is each of the co-owners' interest may be conveyed separately. A tenancy in common is formed as the result of 2 or more persons owning an undivided interest in the property. Unity of possession is the only unity required for a tenancy in common. There is no automatic right of survivorship for tenants in common, so they may bequeath their ownership interest to their heirs by will. Oscar and Susan are next-door neighbors. Susan tells Oscar that he can store his camper in her yard for a few weeks until she needs the space. Susan did not charge Oscar rent for the use of her yard. Susan has given Oscar in what? What is a license? Granting the use of property for a defined period for a specific purpose is almost always a form of licensing. Easements grant only access, not ownership, use or occupancy rights. Further, that access is generally for the benefit of the property owner, such as maintaining utilities or sidewalks. The major intent of zoning regulations is to, what is ensure the health, safety and welfare of the community. Zoning regulations are, in fact, an example of police power, and they do set limits on the number and types of business permitted in a given area as well as protect residential neighborhoods from commercial encroachment. However, these are all effects of zoning regulations. They are established and enforced to protect the good of the community in the broadest, fairest way possible. Robin owns a store building which she leased to Juan from April 8 to May 6. Juan's estate in the property would be considered chattel real personal property. All of the other options are correct. An estate for years. What is all of the other options are correct? An estate for years is a form of a lease with defined beginning and end dates. Leases are personal property. They attach to a person and not the property. And another word for personal property is chattel real. That makes all of the other options are correct. The right answer. Peter owns a fee simple parcel of land. Which of the following actions could lead to his ownership status being converted to a less than freehold estate? What is negotiating a sale-leaseback arrangement with a third party? Fee simple means that a property is owned outright. A freehold estate is one in which a person's interest in a property is for an indeterminate period of time. While life estate means that person's interest is for his or her natural life. Leasing the property or selling mineral rights does nothing to alter these forms of ownership. However, a sale-leaseback, usually for the purpose of creating cash flow, transfers ownership to another party while the original owner continues to occupy and or use the land. What is the holder of a leasehold estate called? What is the lessee? More commonly called tenants, holder of leasehold estates are people who rent a piece of property, often as a mobile home site, for a specified period of time. Remainderman and reversioner are terms for certain kinds of beneficiaries in a will, and a lessor is the person granting the leasehold estate. A non-possessory interest in real property is also called what is an encumbrance. A non-possessory interest in land is a term of the law of property to describe any of a category of rights held by one person to use land that is in the possession of another. Such rights can generally be created in one of two ways, either by an express agreement between the party who owns the land and the party who seeks to own the interest or by an order of a court. A claim against, limitation on or a liability against real estate is an encumbrance. Encumbrances include liens, deed restrictions, easements, encroachments, and licenses. An encumbrance can restrict the owner's ability to transfer title to the property or lessen its value. Buyer Joe and the seller Stephen both sign a purchase contract. Joe obtained a loan from the bank. What kind of title interest, if any, does Joe have in the property at this point? What is equitable? In real estate law, equitable title refers to a person's right to obtain full ownership of a property or property interest. This is often contrasted with or used in conjunction with the term legal title, which is the actual ownership of the land. When somebody gets a loan from the bank holds legal title until the debt is paid off. An easement on real estate would terminate if the holder of the dominant tenement recorded a what is a quitclaim deed? The easement can be terminated by the dominant tenement if they record a quitclaim deed. The dominant tenement benefits from the easement. The servient tenement is burdened by it. Just think of what the word dominant means. It means they are in control. Thus they have the right to end the easement. A joint tenant can dispose of an interest held in real property by all of the following ways, except, what is will? Joint tenancy has the right of survivorship. If one joint tenant dies, the surviving joint tenants automatically absorb the decedent's interest. Because the surviving joint tenants get the deceased member's interest in the property, a joint tenant cannot will his, her interests. An estate in real property, what is may exist along with other estates in the same property. For example, one may hold an estate for years in a property owned by another who holds a freehold estate. Leases are created by a grant. Immediate possession is not necessary to create an interest in real property. Leases and periodic tenancies do not run on into perpetuity. Mechanics lien, a lien created by statute for the purpose of securing priority of payment for the price or value of work performed and materials furnished in construction or repair of improvements to land, and which attaches to the land as well as the improvements. Are based on, what is the California Civil Code? In California, mechanics lien law is statutory law contained in the California Civil Code. Which of the following is not a test for a fixture? The method of attachment, the time of attachment, the intention of the parties, the agreement of the parties. What is the time of attachment? Fixtures are objects that are attached to real property or incorporated into the land which are now considered real property. In determining whether or not an item of personal property has become a fixture, use the Maria test. Method of attachment: adaptability, relationship, intention, and agreement. The size, cost and time of attachment are not factors. Another name for an estate of inheritance is. What is fee simple estate? The fee simple estate, aka fee simple absolute, fee ownership, estate of inheritance, is absolute ownership of the property and entitles the owner to all rights of the property, which are only restricted by law or private restrictions, such as zone ordinances or covenants. At the death of the owner, the estate passes to the owner's heirs. All of the following statements are true about zoning except, what is not zoning is retroactive. Zoning laws are not retroactive, meaning they cannot take effect on a past date. Zoning laws are forward-looking and regulate future uses of a land or property site rather than the existing ones. Note, this question says all of the following are true about zoning except, which means it's looking for a false answer, and it's false that zoning is retroactive. The system of ownership of real property in the United States is what? What is allodial? Allodial is the modern form of ownership and is often contrasted with feudal, in which land is held on the condition of rent or service to the government. For example, a medieval knight held property subject to coming to his baron's service when called. Similarly, the baron's land holdings were conditional on his raising an army and fighting for the king in times of conflict. Failure of any party to perform as promised was cause for holdings to be confiscated, often as a preliminary step to more extreme actions. Jenny owns 50 acres of land with 500 feet of frontage on a desirable recreational lake. She wishes to subdivide the parcel into saleable lots, but she wants to retain control over the lake frontage while allowing lot owners to have access to the lake. Which of the following types of access rights would provide the greatest protection for a prospective purchaser? What is an appurtenant easement? Appurtenant easements afford the most protection since they are generally a permanent feature of the property. Thus, in the case of sale, the lake access passes to any new owners. By contrast, an easement in gross is between two individuals, which would severely limit the attractiveness and value of the property if the original owner wished to sell. Another name for an estate of inheritance is, what is fee simple estate? The fee simple estate, aka fee simple absolute, fee ownership, estate of inheritance, is absolute ownership of the property and entitles the owner to all rights of the property, which are only restricted by law or private restrictions, such as zone ordinances or covenants. At the death of the owner, the estate passes to the owner's heirs. Under which of the following types of liens can both the personal property and the real property of the debtor be sold to pay the debt? What is judgment lien? Most liens are against a specific property, such as a primary residence. Thus, a contractor seeking payment for a new debt cannot have a homeowner's car attached in settlement. A judgment lien, however, is a decision directed by the courts and can apply to whatever assets it deems appropriate. The Easton vs. Strasburger case helped define a broker's duty to disclose material facts to a potential buyer. Which of the following best describes the disclosure required? What is a list of property defects that are known or should be known? Easton vs. Strasburger gave rise to the law requiring the seller and agent to make full disclosure of the condition of the property. A judgment will be most effective in the county where the what is judgment is recorded. A judgment has no legal effect until recorded, and then only to the extent it is recorded in a county in which the defendant owns real property. Sam and Nancy bought a store building and took title as joint tenants. Nancy died testate. Sam now owns the store. What is inseveralty? Joint tenancy means that two parties have an undivided interest in a particular property and, upon the death of one party, full ownership automatically goes to the survivor. Therefore, dying testate having a will would not be relevant.